Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us as we speak with a very thoughtful and dynamic author and independent curator, Nathalie Johnston. Specializing in contemporary art from South and Southeast Asia, itself a significant shift towards breaking inherited colonial boundaries, in 2016, Nathalie founded Myanmar, an independent exhibition space, archive, and library located in Yangon, where she was based from 2012 onwards. Soon after the political transition began in 2010, during the landslide victory of the National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi in 2015, and until the coup by the military junta, Tatmadaw, on the morning of 1st February 2021. In our conversation today, Myanmar, Art in the Time of Transition, Nathalie will share with us her incredible experience of setting up a gallery within an emergent, vibrant arts ecosystem in Yangon, and of working with artists as they explored the experience of possibility and confronted their own inherited biases in suggesting who partakes in the new nation. In 2014, and I'm tempted to say that there are no coincidences left, the Rohingya were left out of a national census conducted for the first time in 30 years and were incorrectly identified as Bangladeshi immigrants. In 2015, the government passed the race and religion laws, specifically targeting Muslims. In 2016, violence ensued in Rakhine State, forcing 86,000 Rohingya to flee. Today, there are nearly 1 million Rohingya in refugee camps around Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh. This already sounds uncomfortably familiar, not merely as analogy, but in its entanglements with the National Register of Citizens in 2019 for Assam, which excluded 2 million people precisely on the grounds that they were illegal Bangladeshi immigrants. And then, about 2 weeks ago, the Indian Navy forced 40 Rohingya refugees into the Andaman Sea, pointing to the ways in which our own boundedness to the nation has led to amnesia about our historical, continuous, and interconnected relationship with Myanmar and the larger Southeast Asia region. For Tamils populated colonial Burma as both Chettiar merchants and predominantly Dalit indentured labor, with the latter building railway tracks that would link Thailand and Burma and later be used as an exit route by political exiles, smugglers, and insurgents. In 1946, the revolt of sailors across Bombay, Karachi, and Rangoon in the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny was perhaps the last desperate attempt of a transnational left imaginary before the formation of the nation state in the colonial South. In just last month, Nagas living around the Indo-Myanmar borderland protested against the centre's decision to fence the 1,643-kilometer-long border, which for Nagas is an imaginary line, with little bearing on the cohesion of their communities that live on both sides of the border. How do we understand, then, the hyper-insular nationalisms of these states? If the present would have been an unanticipated future during the time that Nathalie was present in Yangon, she draws a longer arc of Burmese modernism that helps us understand the imagination of the nation at the time of another 20th century decolonial transition. And yet, this is not to romanticize the decade of possibility in the very recent past. The gallery still runs, people still live in Yangon, artists are still making work, reminding us of what writer Wendy Loyon, who grew up in Rangoon in the 1960s, recalls an important lesson. Endings, like beginnings, are never as clear-cut as we wish them to be, and vice versa. Nathalie, too, insists that the tides will turn again, and in the meantime, we continue to think, learn, educate, experiment, fail, try again, and perhaps of most value, build friendships. While Nathalie spent an energetic decade with Myanmar, she also has an astounding body of work, some of which I'd like to share. Her previous curatorial collaborations include Sun Shower, Contemporary Art from Southeast Asia, 1980s to now, at the National Art Center, Tokyo, 3 AM Performance Art Collective in the 10th Asia Pacific Triennial at the Queensland Art Gallery in Brisbane, and A Beast, a God and a Line, exhibited in Hong Kong, Yangon, and Warsaw. She's presented her research at the National Gallery of Singapore, Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, Serendipity Arts Festival, and Asia Society in India. She's also lectured at James Madison University in Virginia and the Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. In 2015, she was a selected scholar of the Getty Foundation Program, Ambitious Alignments, hosted by the University of Sydney. Her work is published in Frieze Magazine, Art Review Asia, Art Asia Pacific, and numerous international exhibitions and catalogs. Her essay, Homegrown, The Origins of Performance Art in Myanmar, appears in Curating Art, recently published by Routledge. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes for our audience members. We encourage an interactive session, so please do share questions and comments in the Q&A box, which should be located on the bottom panel of your screen. We will open up the discussion to the audience after Nathalie's talk. We'll also post some relevant links and reference in the chat box during the discussion, so please do keep an eye out for that. We're delighted to have you with us, Nathalie, and without further ado, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Radhika. What an amazing contextual introduction, and really points to some of the ways that Myanmar speaks to the region as well, and how it interacts, even if we don't see those fruits very often. Drawing those historical lines is really important. And thank you all for coming. I'm really thrilled to be doing something like this, to reminisce a little bit, but to look back on all of these challenges that we faced. I know there are some people here who were right there with me in Yangon, some family members and some new faces. So as for myself at the moment, I'm now based in Sri Lanka and in Colombo, and even then we can see lots of parallels to some of the work and the what the artists are paying attention to. So I'm going to get started. I just want you to know that there are many images, which I will not explain in detail, but I do want to kind of overload you with visuals so that you get a sense of the urgency of the time when we were there, between sort of 2016 and 2021. But also to give you a sense of what the art looked like. And I think that is something that's lacking. Myanmar art has not been able to spread as far and wide as we would have liked. But anyway, without further ado, I will go ahead and get started. And please do ask questions. You can ask them anytime in the chat box, and we'll address them later. So let me get rid of this. I wanted to start today by telling you that it is Mandalay's 166th birthday. Mandalay was founded as the new capital of Burma in 1859 on this day. And it is one of the reasons that I'm starting this presentation with a slide from the Ludu Library and Archive in Mandalay. I think what I want to point out here is that the kind of sharing of information and the way that we access history are through places like libraries and archives, which are not prevalent in Myanmar, or they're difficult to access. Now, this is a privately run, family-owned library and archive. Ludu means the people. They were a leftist family and very influential in the throughout the independence movement in the 30s and 40s, the war, World War II, and the 1950s. But Mandalay was also not only the home of royalty, but the kind of birthplace of modern art. One particular artist, Khin Maung Bank, is thought to be one of the first artists who really embraced something new and different, possibly influenced by all of the international kind of exchange happening, but also by his own culture and his surroundings. And he, in turn, helped found one of Myanmar's oldest, I think probably Myanmar's oldest art gallery, called Lokanat. And so I encourage you, even now, when you think about Myanmar, to think of the geography and the map. Normally with these kinds of presentations, I would start with a map. I think everyone present knows where we are, but in any case, these cities are still coming up, and they still have a lot of activity, especially now, political activity, and of course the recent earthquake. where Mandalay was basically on the fault line next to Sagaing. So I don't want to forget those also that have suffered. So in the bottom corner is Lokanat Gallery. It's on the first floor in this very beautiful old colonial building. And I'm sharing these images to kind of talk about the type of work that was shown in galleries years. The modern really, and it sort of translated into this so-called tourist art that many were not kind of involving in the contemporary. They just thought this is the type of art, it's kind of realist or abstract, but it doesn't say anything. And in an interview I was reading with Mossad recently, it's a few years old, but it was something that he said, observing what the art scene was like in Yangon, and how you can imagine someone like him, a young artist who was the founder of Beyond Pressure, a performance art festival, the galleries and the spaces felt very limiting. And I also wanted to point to this work, which is not by a Myanmar artist. It's by an Indian artist named Amar Kunwar, who is living in Delhi. But it's a work that where he tells the stories of the diaspora, the people who left Myanmar through a lot of political struggle and kind of kept this fight alive. And I want you to keep that in mind throughout, because the stories of migrants and the stories of those who leave are kind of equally important, if I may say, and they share a lot of the burden as well in many ways. So this artwork, I think we might share a link to it, but I encourage you to look it up. It's actually a video work that was turned into a book. Yeah, it speaks to this politics of a place and something that inspired me very early on. And the Torn First Pages is about tearing out the first page of every published book in Myanmar for decades, because in the front page was something required to be there by the military government, a kind of nationalist manifesto, if you will. And it was considered, it's censorship. And I wanted to point out as well that my colleague, Melissa Carlson, was also addressing these issues during this time of transition. Censorship officially ended in 2012. But this was something that people really were curious about. What is going to happen when and once the censorship apparatus breaks down? Is there going to be an explosion of expression and creativity? And I would argue that, yes, there was. So I won't discuss, what brought me to Myanmar was family in 1997, and my mother worked for Radio Free Asia, so I had an early interest in the politics, but I ended up going back in 2009. And I guess what I discovered was a bunch of young artists my age who were really cool and and just kind of wanted to talk and share. And I just wanted to work in the arts. And somehow we all really connected and we wanted to do something together. So 7,000 Padak was the first project that we created, a kind of pop-up in a house that was going to be torn down in 3 months' time. It was also the first time that we crowdfunded. This transitional Myanmar, there was a lot of funding coming into play, but it wasn't by any quick. You had to be a registered organization or something like that, and we didn't have time, nor did we have the patience to wait for others to get on board. So we really relied on our friends to help us out and support. So this was our first pop-up space. I encourage you to send me a message if you'd like to see the catalog. We have a digital PDF, but there's lots of information online and videos and things of us asking for support to create these strange exhibitions. And in the meantime, learning through this transition, education always came up. The lack of it, the lack of kind of contemporary education, and the mobile library Myanmar was an attempt to create more learning opportunities and digitization workshops, visiting professors. Interestingly, the mobile library, which was partnered with Asia Art Archive in Hong Kong, had previously been in Sri Lanka. So you see a picture of a professor here with a chalkboard at the University of Art and Culture in Yangon. And it's T.K. Shanathanan, who's a very well-known, respected artist and professor here in Sri Lanka. So I never knew at that time that I would end up living here and knowing him, but it's a nice full circle moment. In any case, it was important to us to create dialogue around books and reading and translation, and openness and access to archives. And that's where things started to really coalesce. I think translation was a big issue. One of the things that people kept telling me was, we need books, we need more books, we need more books. And the opening of the mobile library at one of the locations in Yangon, there were about 500 new books. And a Dr. Ong Min, who's also a filmmaker, came up to me and said, yeah, great job, but they're not in Burmese. And that was a kind of first taste of, oh, but that's a different project, but that's also a good project. So you'll see, I had a very steep learning curve my whole time in Yangon and in Myanmar. And speaking of, I swore I would never give this cliched article any face time, but I realized that over the years, it really just played a huge role in what could have been and what was in Yangon and the art scene. So there was lots of money coming in. Myanmar was transitioning into democracy. It was opening up. It was changing. So there was a lot of support and aid, but also interest from private companies, private collectors, and Ivan Pan, who had a real vision for what Yangon could potentially be, just had this idea to open up a kind of concept gallery and shop on the riverfront in Yangon. And not so long after opening, this article came out in the Wall Street Journal, very accusatory and discussing how problematic this gallery was. And there was also a restaurant and a shop. And by various channels, the article was translated into Burmese. Someone in the government saw it. Eventually, things were canceled or leases weren't renewed, and we had to close the space. And it was devastating. It was devastating for us, for all the people who worked really hard to make it happen. It was devastating for a lot of the artists who were looking forward to using this beautiful place. But it also goes to show how how things just don't work out sometimes, and you have a lot of lessons to learn from that. But what it did build was this incredible network, a network of international attention, a network of kind of support and interest, and it was able to showcase what the artist could really do. So it was, in the end, worth every sacrifice. And I guess eventually led to many other things. And it led me to open Myanmar, which I was encouraged to do by Ivan, my previous boss, by many of the artists, by my partner. And once I had this space, I had this library collection archive I wanted to open up, and I wanted to do programming, but I was a bit of a fool. I mean, I'd never run a gallery before that was mine. So I really took that ownership into my own hands and kind of let the artists do whatever they wanted, including this crew. There's Wuna Aung and 9 Micro and Bart. And I just let them spray paint the entire gallery floor to ceiling. It was a great show. It was an amazing opening, but I neglected to remember that that to paint over enamel paint or spray paint takes many layers and lots of money. But it was a great kind of first few exhibitions because we just did all kinds of experimental stuff. We got a crane and brought in this furniture artwork that Taylin made over the balcony. We really tried to champion women artists who had a lot of had a big track record, but maybe had never shown a solo exhibition in Yangon in their home cities. So we really tried to privilege them, and the artists just got really creative. You know, they really went for it, how to transform the space, how to make it their own. And of course, we also continued to use this library archive and work with children, with classes, with musicians. Yeah, and a lot of the artists really appreciated it. And I think, speaking as a foreigner, I think for the artist, it was more comfortable to see me in a physical space instead of me floating around managing various projects and trying to get friends involved and support different things. It was nice to have that grounding space where they could come and make it their own. I think what I like to call Myanmar is a kind of artist-led space. And things were really, really good for a while. I think everyone felt that things were changing. There was an optimism. But of course, as Radhika mentioned, the Rohingya crisis was coming to a point. And when 2017 came along, when it really finally turned into what everyone knew that it was, which is ethnic cleansing, then things got very uncomfortable very quickly for everyone, for people visiting Myanmar. You know, the boycott of Myanmar for all those decades was sort of abandoned during a brief transition period. And when this was happening and people were reading the news, they didn't want to come anymore. Fair enough. But it was also very, very difficult for the artists to address. And I think it kind of took them years to do so. There was one artist, Soang, who's very important. He's from a very well-known historic family, political family in Myanmar. But he's never lived in Myanmar. He grew up on the Thai-Burma border. And he's from a family of activists, soldiers, really. And he was very vocal and was able to say things that artists who were living in Myanmar just couldn't say or wouldn't say. And we finally were able to show his work. And it was very shocking for the artist to see the violence, not only the violence in visual art of what's happened to the Rohingya, but the title, just the word being in the space was somehow. I remember a journalist from Frontier asked me, how are you allowed to show this? And I just said, like, I didn't ask permission. But I also think that it was high time that we needed to show something so that people knew, you know, that there were thoughts out there. And eventually the artist did address it. And some of the artists outside, including Choi Iten, who moved in 2008 to the US, she was one of the first also to share in this incredible series of work, which you can see on the Form and Concept Gallery website that she's represented by in New Mexico. It's so shocking to see a Buddha statue kind of in camouflage and wrapped, and I just feel she never would have been able to show this work in Myanmar, and still not. So yeah, this kind of outsider-insider viewpoint was also very, very important to how the art was kind of chugging along and how the artists were reacting, experimenting, saying things or not saying things. I wanted to also look at this article by Yinka. Sorry, I thought that her name was on this screenshot, but anyway, this was also, Yinka is a very notable historian who's looked at Myanmar for 20 years plus, and she wrote an article that kind of named 4 artists as the kind of true meaning, the manifestation of contemporary. And then what guts, she translated her article and then had a panel discussion and hosted these artists to discuss contemporary art in Myanmar. And it was like a clash of generations. You know, the audience was full of young people who had not spoken with these artists before. You know, they knew their work, they admired them, but they felt like these artists were distant from them. You know, maybe they generally exhibited abroad and they didn't exhibit in Yangon. So all of these voices that were converging all at the same time, I think it made us all turn a bit inward, and wanting to still support Yangon and still support the artists, but try to flush out the outside voices and do something just for them in their space. And that's where Piensa Rasa came about. We were 5 organizations that worked in music, in food, in film, in photography and art. And we formed a collective and we created exhibitions asking these questions, you know, to partnering with kind of anyone who wanted to work with us, looking at, you know, the history of film, pushing some boundaries, and trying to create a really massive public platform for Myanmar. My Justice, which was an organization that worked with British Council, also commissioned us to do an exhibition about justice in Myanmar and how it is, you know, how can we confront it every day? And it was a really, really special exhibition. First of all, because the organizers themselves, the people at the British Council, I think, were more nervous than anyone about the work that was shown. Also, that Sawang, which I showed the screenshot earlier, Sawang pulled out in kind of protest of the EU funding of the exhibition because of the Rohingya, and so we just created these massive installations to examine. For example, this coincided work was about the rape of 2 Kachin teachers in the north. So there's a lot of heavy topics that just seemed to like need expression over those years, and that was one of the things that made that transition period so sensitive, but also so exciting. That people felt sort of comfortable to speak out. And this was our new Myanmar space. We got kicked out of the old one, which is a familiar story for anyone who's ever lived in Yangon. And we continued to show kind of work that we believed in, and artists continued to experiment. And over the years, it really improved. You know, there was more dedication and devotion to the object and the concept and the research that went into the work. And then during COVID, we got some incredible opportunity to finally put our archive online. And after the coup, we couldn't keep it funded. So we put everything online over a year, and the website doesn't exist anymore. So it kind of also goes to show that all of this platforming, all of this public acknowledgement and sharing is, you know, it doesn't always work. And that's kind of part of the process. And literally none of it mattered anymore after the morning of February 1st, when we found out that that Min Aung Hlaing had staged this coup. And everybody just, that 24 hours was horrible. It was just like the bottom dropped out. Nobody knew what was going to happen, but everybody knew it wasn't good and nothing would ever be the same. I feel very privileged that I was able to finally see the Burmese people as I have always read about them in protest. It was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. But within weeks it became violent. But the artists remained steadfast, kept creating, and made some incredible work that we shared digitally or physically in exhibitions all over the world. And the artists and communities that are in Thailand now have been especially active and fantastic, reaching out and supporting young people and this expression and, you know, keeping the fight alive. So this was part of our team. This was kind of the last photo we all took together. And I left Yangon in end of April 2021. But Sid and Min Chipang, who are in the picture, they kept Myanmar running. I mean, and they for years they moved spaces if they needed to. They just did digital articles. They worked with artists that I never got to know, a kind of much younger set. And they just kept things going in spite of all the things that were happening. So I'm really just beyond all of our expectations that the Myanmar name could stay alive and continue to contribute. But Yangon changed, of course. Those public murals and things that were happening all those years, you know, they were painted over, abandoned. This was particularly sad one. I know, just kind of the color drained out of the city. But again, there are things still happening. As I said, artists are very active in Thailand, of course, but all over Europe and some in the US. There is a very good organization called Artolution that works in Bangladesh and Cox's Bazar, and they've been there for, I think now a decade, working with young people. You know, at the moment, there's not Rohingya artists that are included in this sort of Myanmar artist canon, but I have no doubt that will become part of the future for Myanmar art. And Yele, also having done a few shows in Paris now, residency, and also this question of becoming a different nationality, which a lot of the diaspora have had to face. It's not only visa troubles, but asking, you know, am I ever going to go back? And some people say, yes, definitely, I'm just having a few residency years and I'll go back to Myanmar. And some just don't see how they can. And it's not a violent process, but it's the bureaucracy of becoming someone else is a terribly stressful process. And I'm just conscious of time. I hope I haven't gone too quickly, but I just wanted to end with this. There's so many other artists who are doing lots of cool things. But this is the most recent that I've seen. Bart just posted these just last week. Very different from his work before, and called The Waiting Room. And he's, you know, these dancers are in a poppy field. You see a broken down building behind the kind of main character. And anyone who's lived in Myanmar, these images will seem very familiar. But I think what I'm left with is, again, the draining of color and the fatigue of all these changes, but also some of the kind of the force of hope and continuing to do or make or talk. I know that people in Myanmar are sick of being called resilient. There's just been more than enough to deal with over the years, but I really have just admired so much the artists all these years, what they've been through and what they really reflect. And I think they can relate to many other people in many other situations. And I think that expression that they give, as if they have absolutely nothing to lose, I think you'll just continue to see that from them wherever they're located. And I'm very, very grateful that I was able to be a part of their lives and theirs in mine. And you know, even to give a talk like this it's really meaningful to me, because it means that the work continues to inspire and invite collaboration. So yeah, that's all from me. I hope it was okay. It didn't go too fast with all those images, but that's the gist of the kind of art and education and network in the transitional years of Myanmar, which will no doubt continue.
Thank you, Natalie. I mean, I think it was wonderful, and thank you for sharing your journey with Myanmar, really. I think it gives us a sense of sort of the everyday practice of dealing in one sense with the aftermath of a 60-year war, right? And also what are really the new forms of creating and sort of rituals of hope, probably. And of course, what we're left with is, in one sense, a reality that the past is not really in the past, no. And but as you had said, I think you'd mentioned earlier that it's sort of cyclical and it keeps returning. So that's also something to give hope. Just for the audiences, the floor is now open for discussion. So please do write in your questions or comments in the Q&A box. And maybe while we give audiences a few moments to gather their thoughts and just the incredible artwork, I think it's also, for us sitting here, it's very rare to actually see work art from Myanmar. And so this was really incredible. But maybe I'd like to start off with a few questions. And audience members, please, we really like this to be conversational, so please to send in questions in the meantime. But I really have been very keen and interested, Natalie, on thinking through with your research on Burmese modernisms and your previous work on Ludu and Doamar and Hula. Because what it seems to be is that the significance of that, of them in understanding the production of historical narrative in the present, right? And I think you had mentioned that there's a difference in the response of artists in the North and the South when the nationalist leader Aung San, who's also the father of the military, was assassinated. And I was just wondering, in what ways do you think this narrative is both sort of produced by and is also itself a result of nationalist discourse? And specifically then in relation to what does the left do, has been doing, or is, what do you think is the possibility in kind of not creating a dogmatic form of its own, I think, in some way, nationalism? And I'd love to hear a little about that, because
Yeah. I mean, as you can imagine, nation building and nationalism is extremely important to the military. How do you keep a huge country like Myanmar, that goes, you know, from the Himalayas all the way down to the Andaman Sea? How do you keep them together? The ethnic groups, and the answer is, like, you don't, without force, right? And we can see this. We can see this in all Western nations as well. That nationalist discourse is something that the left always fought against, right? And I think having nationalism first established by a transitional government after independence, Burma was very unique in that they did not join the Commonwealth. They didn't even become sort of friends of the Commonwealth. They just said, we want the British out, we want everyone out, we will sort ourselves. So there wasn't a lot of structure And one of the ways that they kind of got inspiration was fair enough from China. And China really privileged the art, right? With their nationalist discourse, art was very much a part of the conversation, and how you build pride and how you build a sense of community. And I think one of the main things that I discussed with, the people in the north, right, Mandalay, the Ludu family, being leftist, they weren't as connected to this religion, right? They were more about building a world in which everybody could live, including all of the ethnic groups that live around Mandalay. Whereas that transitional government, the first prime minister, UNU, of the first prime minister of that so-called democratic period, he made Buddhism the national religion, and funded artworks and exhibitions that privileged this narrative that Burma is Buddhist and Burma is going to be this, and this is how we're moving forward. And I think the religion conversation, of course, is very, very relevant to us all right now, right? In India, in Sri Lanka, in America, how that sort of tore the art world, let's say, of the time, the modernist art world apart. You have one side that is looking at the kind of free form expression and finding yourself and individuality, and you have the nationalist narrative that is supported by a government. And I think that's where the split kind of begins, and that's where I see artists like Aung Kin and Kim Aung Bank and these artists that were in the north, in Mandalay, I think really set the stage for contemporary art in Myanmar. Whereas there were others, very important artists, highly respected, super talented, who are also an important part of the history, but tended to lean into this trajectory of what is Myanmar? It is Buddhist, and the military has continued that with full force, and that is the way in which they continue to fight the will of the people is masquerading behind religion. So that's where I think that the left of Myanmar was kept alive in a way through the artists.
Yeah, and hopefully that sometimes we look back at that period and feel there was so much happening, but I hope that kind of continues, and from the work it does seem like it does. And just going to come to the questions, I think coming into the present, Vijaya has asked, can you please tell us more about how artists balanced risk of censure, arrest, etc., with remaining true to their artistic expression?
Yeah, very good question. Well, in some cases they didn't. When we spoke about the Rohingya topic, this was, even if artists felt a certain way, it was a couple of years before I saw any kind of work in Yangon that wasn't so much of the fear of arrest. The government stopped sort of blatantly censoring art exhibitions and artworks to where they would go in and stamp things or take down the work after 2012. But all of that moved online, right? So it was about sharing your work online was kind of a brave and bold act. But it was almost like you weren't afraid of the government. You were afraid of your peers, right? Of someone reporting you. And that is that has been a common thread in Myanmar for a long time. This kind of, who's whispering in whose ear. But I mean, I think I guess the answer is they self-censored a lot because they knew the risks, or maybe if they didn't know where the line was, they had to take sort of baby steps. And some were much braver than others, but but I don't know if they ever achieved the balance. I think it was such a short period in which they were able to experiment. It was more like a watching and waiting. And maybe the younger people were a bit more impulsive with their subjects.
I suppose related to that and kind of a follow-up, Luis has asked about the current situation in the country at the moment, since many artists have fled overseas, especially to Thailand. I understand that Nathalie made a return trip to Myanmar last year. How difficult is the situation? How are artists in Yangon still working and showing, and where? And what sort of art are they producing?
It's a very different city, Yangon. You wouldn't recognize it, Louis. It's certainly had a kind of population shift. You can tell a lot of young people have left. Also the conscription law that came into effect a couple of years ago. Basically, they can pick up anyone, man or woman of a certain age, and either bribe you or throw you into the army to serve. So there's a lot of tension. So you think, how on earth could artists still be working in the midst of this? And the truth is, a lot of them have left. There's a lot of artists that have gone to Taunji, to these second cities, third cities. Kalaw is a new kind of artistic center now. There are galleries. I think a few have opened since 21, new galleries that are generally owned by collectors. And there's a whole market now for Myanmar painting, an internal market. So when I went to visit Lokanat Gallery, which I mentioned is the oldest, still continuously running gallery in Yangon, and they've done lots of incredible shows and lots of shows that were just, your regular painting. And I asked the manager, how's business been? Kind of pitifully, right? Like, and he was like, it's great. Like, we've been making so much money. We are doing really well. And that is a sort of irony of the closing up of Myanmar. And it's not the first time this has happened, right? This is a way for people to invest in their community as it is. It's a closed kind of space to buy work, to continue to support the artists. And Myanmar at the moment is not active in Yangon, but the space is there if people want to use it, and the library is there. So I think it's more of a bit of an underground scene. And the honest conclusion to that is there's a whole new young generation of artists, and I don't know them, which makes me really sad. But there are others who are still there and working with these kids. I know Maunde, who's a very well-known artist and poet, who's still there, and he is doing a lot of workshops, creative writing workshops, talking with young people. And he did the same thing. He was like, I don't know any of these kids, but we're trying our best to sort of inspire them and keep things going. So thank goodness there are still people there who are dedicating their lives to keeping that creativity going.
I'm reminded, I think it was Thailand who did a prison exhibition. It was Thailand did a prison exhibition, and that's almost, could you speak to us a little bit about that? Because it's almost as if it's returned in a way, like what are, just thinking about there are still always things that one can do under extreme constraints. And when I read about that, I was just like, wow, how does that even happen? But
you're talking about the exhibition recently, or the one that we did years ago?
Years ago, I think.
The Goethe Institute one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was another example of, you don't know where the line is, so you have to cross it in order to figure out where it was. And this was the first time that Tay Lin had shown his paintings that he made in prison in Myanmar in the 2000, I think he was in 2000 2008 to 2011, something like that. Forgive me if I've mucked up those dates. I'd have to look it up. But he was in prison for a long time and created paintings on prison uniforms, you know, kind of paid the guards for paint and brushes, and or didn't even use brushes, used like razor edges, and made these incredible pieces, which we eventually showed in an exhibition called The Storyteller. And yeah, it was another one of those exhibitions where people reacted like, how is this possible? You know, this is really changing. Wow, like nobody's getting in trouble, no one's getting arrested. This is allowed now. We're allowed to talk about, you know, how difficult it is and was, and how the justice system is, you know, corrupt. And, you know, it was just this open conversation, and incredible. And Tay Lin had been through so much. It must have been very cathartic to have a show like that. I mean, and he's going through it again now. He has a new gallery in Kalau. He's opened a space with his daughter, and they're promoting Shan artists. But he's not allowed to leave the country. So yeah, it's very, very challenging, yet they continue. So this is sort of why I mentioned the cyclical thing. I can't imagine that it won't continue to be challenging, but it will also open up again in a different way, in a new way, especially since everyone's connected now via the internet and social media.
Mm-hmm. Do you also, I think this is something that seems to resonate a lot over here, but did you find that there was a difference between the concerns in one way of diasporic and domestic artists, and especially now if a lot of artists are going to be forced to kind of leave? Yeah, I was just curious what you thought about that, and how the space mediated that kind of difference, if there was any, or...
Yeah, again, it's happened before, right? When I first moved to Yangon, Tay Lin was living abroad and doing exhibitions in London, and Chow Yit-Dain was in New York doing exhibitions, and there was always a kind of resentment around these artists who were allowed to be political because they were living in free countries. And but you know, there's a lot of interesting now, knowing many artists who are still in Myanmar, but also many artists who have left. There's a lot of challenges for them too, and being part of a diaspora and trying to fit in a country that's not your home, and trying to be understood or have your work understood, which is completely out of context, has also been really difficult. So there is still some resentment, you know. The artists who leave, like the people who leave, you know, oh, you were privileged enough to be able to go. But then I know a lot of people who chose to stay. They could have left, and they have chosen to stay. So I don't know. I think what I've learned from speaking to everybody is that it's hard. It's really hard either way. And there's a lot of guilt among those who leave. And a lot of resentment from those who stay. But maybe we can all find comfort in the fact that this is happening so much all over the world as well, that we're not alone in these moves. Something that really bound us all together after the coup, these decisions that everybody had to make on the fly. And some of the artists were just like, when can I go? Like, this is my chance. I'm leaving. People like Bart, who've never felt that life was easy for him in Myanmar. So he was desperate to go. And then people like Nathalie, who just made this very hard decision after a very long time because of her daughter. She just wanted her daughter to have more chances. So yeah, there's a tension there. There's books to be written about that tension and the comparisons in the artwork as well. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess perhaps one really does start to see that there is, especially with so much repression, that there's always a space to do things either inside or outside, and that's what's important. But speaking of books, well, we look forward to having your book out. It's
Yes, it's in process. I'm editing now and hopefully can find a publisher, but I really do, the main sort of thing with the book is so that people have these images, you know, that you can see that this is a thing, this was a scene. You know, Myanmar is a place with lots of artists and lots of things going on and a very robust history. And that was a question I got a lot when I was first starting out in Yangon from international curators. Like, what are you doing there? Like, are there contemporary artists there? You know, it's just kind of this place that this mystery, right? There was all this mystery around. The most famous thing to ever come out of Myanmar is Aung San Suu Kyi. So if you're not talking about her, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And in some ways we've inherited, I think, that those blind spots, but hopefully that'll change. And this talk was very, very tiny attempt at doing that, but I think we're out of time. But I just wanted to say thank you so much, Nathalie, for agreeing to do this and for this very inspiring conversation. Really, I think it's an urge and kind of a push to do and to keep doing and to act. And
that's what I believe. You've just got to keep doing it and trying things, and that's how we keep hope alive, right? We just keep connecting.
Yeah. Well, thank you, and thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for attending.
Yes, thank you also to our audiences. The conversation will be uploaded in a week on our app and on the website. And please also just in the future, next few weeks, look out for our coverage of the Kolkata People's Film Festival and the Asia Society Awards. And do also join us for our next talk, which is going to be on the 7th of June with curator Salima Hashmi and Manmeet Walia on their ongoing exhibition at SOAS, which is actually from young artists across the South Asia. So we're really, I think, trying to cross boundaries and traverse them. And anyway, thank you and good evening to everybody.
See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.